Are you currently suffering from domain name anxiety? That's the condition that occurs when you're trying to find a domain name, a URL for your website that says what you want it to say and is actually available and that you can afford to buy. This is often something that comes up when you're naming your business or when you're rebranding, you're perhaps creating a product with a standalone website for it. Can you get the domain name? I hear now that some people actually consider the domain name availability before they name their children, so that they know that the child's going to be able to buy the domain name for their full name. So if that's a concern that you have today, I'm going to demonstrate it the way that I think about it, some of the things to bear in mind. I know it seems like quite a geeky thing to get into, but I know it comes up so much of people starting businesses and launching products, but it seems very relevant. Now, at the moment, I'm launching my own product, my new venture called the Love Challenge, which is a program that's going to run in November 2018. I'm also launching a podcast with Psychologist Magazine, which is also called the Love Challenge. And so I want a place where when the program is available later this year, we'll be able to put a sales page, something that describes the program and allows people to buy or to ask more questions. And I also want, in the meantime, that to be a place where people can find out more about the podcast and everything else that's going on as I'm building this program that's about dating and relationships. So how do I approach this thing? I know that I want to call the program The Love Challenge. I quite like including the word the in there. So it could be lovechallenge.com. But I actually want to stick to the name, The Love Challenge. And one of the reasons I want to do that is because The Love Challenge abbreviated actually is TLC, which seems like quite a nice little play on words. And it also echoes a program I used to run for 6 years, had over 1,300 people take it, called the 30-Day Challenge. And now everyone has lots of 30-day challenges, but when I started it was the only one around. So that was a distinctive name back then. So how am I going to name this thing? How am I going to find a domain that's available? Well, I'm going to share my screen and show you what the sites I go to look at domains, the thinking I go through to choose what I'm going to call something. And you'll see, let's share my screen here. When I'm playing around with domain names, I quite like this site, instantdomainsearch.com. What's nice about this is it's not actually 100% reliable. It occasionally gives you a mismatch, says something's available when it isn't. But it's otherwise mostly there, and it's so fast because if I type in every time I type a new letter, it's basically updating the availability of all the domains with that, with what I've typed so far. So if I, for instance, remove the from the front, it immediately updates and shows me what is available with just Love Challenge. And this, for me, is the quickest way of playing around when I'm working with clients on my programs about starting businesses and launching products, even naming books. We might play around in here to find a domain that works. So if I'm going to stick with the Love Challenge, I can see that lovechallenge.com is not available. That's quite common. But what I would always want to do is check what it's doing at the moment. And it's saying, GoDaddy, I can make an offer, minimum offer amount $50,000. I think that'll be a no at this point. To take a $50,000 cost on the program hasn't launched yet would be a little bit unwise, I would suggest. The thing we're trying to avoid is choosing an alternative domain when the main domain, like the .com, is in use, and particularly if it's in use for something similar. So the worst case scenario is, if we look at this, I think it says .org is gone. It says who is. What that means is you can look up, you can't buy it, but you can find out who owns it. I think .net is also gone. This goes to just a holding page for GoDaddy, so somebody's registered it and not using it. So the worst possible scenario would be if the Love Challenge went to something that was a dating site that somehow looked like it might be what I was running, and then people will get confused and think, oh, maybe I found John's site, and actually, it's completely the wrong site, and now they're, confused and fed up and kind of give up. If it's not in use, there's a fair chance somebody's just bought it and never done anything with it, or hoping that somebody will offer them a huge sum of money. Now, I could get in touch and I could say, hey, do you want to sell it? That's a little of an elaborate process. And also the price often is, it could be $50,000 like the .com, which I'm not prepared to pay. I have bought domains in the past for a little bit of money. Sometimes it's worth paying $1,000 or $2,000. It really depends on your situation and how much money your business is making or is going to make. So for the time being, what I want to do is find an alternative domain that is available. Now, you probably will have found yourself in this situation. If you've ever tried to find a domain name, you immediately find the .com's gone, maybe even the .org and .net. Those would be my go-to second choice. So .org or .net are probably my favorites. Occasionally .biz could be relevant. I could get that here, but for this particular thing that I'm doing now, that doesn't seem appropriate. I have used .global before. So if I click here, it will take me through to the GoDaddy page. I do not like GoDaddy. I have some domains on GoDaddy, and I really do not like the company. They try to trick you into buying add-ons in a way that is so complex. It's quite difficult to not opt into some sort of upsell, which is completely unnecessary. And recently, I had a domain renew, which is originally, £1 or something for a .com, and then they charged me £18 and charged me for 2 years at one go. Now, somewhere in the terms and conditions, I'm sure I clicked a button that apparently okayed that, but it meant I got a £36 bill just for renewing one .com, which is far more expensive, far more money than you should need to pay for domains. So I tried to avoid GoDaddy, and what I would rather do is use this site, which is Namecheap.com. Now, I was always put off by the name because it sounded, kind of tacky, but they are actually a good domain host. Their purchasing is simple. Their prices are good, as the name suggests, and they just seem to be fairly straightforward. .global is one of the new TLDs. TLD means top level domain. It's the thing that goes on the end of your domain name, .global, .com, .club, as you can see here. And there are a whole bunch of new ones. There's £44 for .global. I always recommend, if you've got a really good idea, do go grab the best domain you can get, but you don't necessarily need to go, okay, I've got to go all in and buy every single domain around the world because I just had one good idea. You can always leave the alternatives for a bit later when you're really sure this is the direction you're going in. What I'm imagining when I'm buying a domain partly is, what's it going to be like to tell people this verbally? So one of the things I'm doing is I'm doing a podcast called The Love Challenge. So I want to be able to say to people, go and find out more about the podcast at thelovechallenge.online or .info or whatever it might be. And I want to not have to explain it. So I always try to avoid things where you don't know the spelling immediately when you say it out loud. So there's a domain which is available, which is thelovechallenge.site, which is SITE. But someone might actually go, wait, SIGHT? They don't know which of the two spellings it is. And now you've doomed yourself to the rest of your life, or the life of this business, explaining how to spell your TLD. And that's the same if you have a domain name which somehow is not obvious, where you say, if it's got the word there in it, and that could be 2 or possibly even 3 different spellings, or some other word where you can only tell when you see it written down the exact meaning. Those are ones to avoid. I also tend to avoid dashes for a similar reason. If it's the-love-challenge, that looks okay maybe when you see it written down, but by the time you've said that a few times, it'll be driving you and everybody else crazy with all the dashes. So try and pick something simple, straightforward. I personally think it's okay to choose these new TLDs, of which there are very many. There's .ai, there's .io. If you go to domains.google rather, you can actually find every single new TLD. So I did a little search earlier, and there are a huge number. There are some really obscure ones. .software, .photos, .city, .cafe. Sometimes it's tempting to say, okay, I'm going to go for lovechallenge.cafe because it sounds like a kind of meeting place. But the problem when you do that is that then what you've done is you've kind of changed the meaning of the brand, and you've shifted things so that people now think they're joining the Love Challenge Cafe. So you've made it a thing in itself. So I try to avoid any extension on the end that's going to shift the brand into a different zone where it now feels like it's got a different name, where the extension on the end is part of the name. I think my favorite at the moment is, there's a .zone. I think that one's quite good. So there's the Love Challenge .zone. And there's also, I think for the time being though, I quite like .info, which is actually available. It's £10. Now, normally I'm not crazy about a .info because I had a reputation early on. GoDaddy used to do promotions on them where you could buy them for 99 cents. And so a lot of people bought them and used them for very spammy purposes. But that problem has mostly gone away. And there is almost there's pretty much no difference, it seems, from all the SEO experts of it makes no difference to your search engine ranking, whether you've got .info, .com, .net, .org, or whatever it might be. There is a level above, which is .gov, .edu, which is like a really formal organization, which is considered more important. But other than that, they're pretty much all the same. So it's not going to do you any harm to have .info. And for me, I can imagine saying on a podcast, go to belovechallenge.info to find out more about the podcast or to find out more about the program. That kind of makes sense to me. I may have a more inspired idea later, but I'm happy to go with that for the time being. So I'm going to go into my, I'm going to go in here. I'm actually going to register that. And I think that will do for the time being. I've got one other domain, which is .world, which I'd already bought a while ago. This is £1.49. I think I can stretch to that. Okay, I bought that domain, so I now own the lovechallenge.info. Now, one other thing to mention is that I tend to avoid .co.uk. I tend to avoid country-specific codes, which you can use, because I don't think that, unless you're deliberately trying to say this is the part of the company that's set in Britain, like Amazon.co.uk, this is the UK part of Amazon, or Amazon.fr is the French part of Amazon. Unless you're trying to do that, it feels a bit small business. It feels a little bit like a local shop. And certainly for something like this, where I run programs where we have participants all over the world, there's no sense in having a country-specific domain. So I avoid one of those. And generally what I'm trying to do is make sure that I've chosen a domain which passes what I would call the pub test. So what that means is, if you make your domain too obscure, no one's going to be able to remember it. You need it to be obvious enough and memorable enough, and without any sort of dashes or complicated spellings. So that when somebody's down the pub with somebody else and they say, hey, I seem to be, okay, in this case, they would say, hey, I'm having a terrible time trying to find a decent person to go out with. Then someone else go, oh, I heard this podcast the other day, or I heard of this program called the Love Challenge. I think the website's for lovechallenge.info. And there's a chance that the person's going to remember, and the other person's going to remember when you tell them, and they might be able to easily write it down. Whereas if you say it's the-love-challenge.dating, you kind of lost them at that point. So that's what we're trying to do. Choose a domain name that passes the pub test, that we think is going to work. And don't get too hung up on it. Now, at the early stages, particularly as I haven't built the site yet or anything else, I'm happy to know that I might change my mind on this. If I've had a good idea and if I've mentioned it to people, it's a good idea to register the domain, because once it's gone, it's gone. So that's why I registered this domain before I release the video, in case some smart aleck wants to register it for me and then hold me to ransom. So I would always try and get the domain I want before I go public on it. What happens is, if you change the domain later, so if I then buy the lovechallenge.com later, or something else that I want to use, then what I can do is I can take the lovechallenge.info and keep it, because it's only cost me $2 a year. And I just make sure that anyone who's heard that link or seen that link somewhere, it just redirects. So when they type in the lovechallenge.info or click on it, it actually takes them to the news site, which may well now be on the lovechallenge.com or .org or .dating or whatever it is I've chosen as a better name. So you're not you're not necessarily losing all the traffic, but what you will lose is you'll lose, from my understanding, I'm not the world's greatest SEO expert, you will lose the Google juice for that domain. So it's not a great idea to change domain name once you've built up lots of links to it. It's bad to change it then, because then you lose all those links and Google then sees your new site as starting from scratch. So it will appear much lower in the search listings. So that's my relatively quick introduction to domains, and hopefully I have helped with your domain name anxiety a little bit, and let me know what you think.